Almost inevitably, the Great American Canal dwarfs the French canal system, of which I'm an ardent fan. It is, however, very similar in many, many ways. The French canals, in our minds, for us Brits, is about being able to get from the English Channel down to the Mediterranean without getting offshore and without having to go to sea, and to do it comfortably and easily. The Intracoastal Waterway, the ICW, is exactly the same. It was created in order for merchant ships, barges, to be able to get from North America to South America, vice versa, without going offshore. In the same way as the French canal system utilizes rivers and the odd lake in order to create the passage from north to south, the ICW does exactly the same. It is made up of absolutely natural rivers, like Indian River. It's made up of lakes and it's made up of estuaries, and only sections of it are actually man-made canalized canals. But it's all marked, it's all buoyed, and it's all dredged to a depth of 10 feet. Yes, there are some areas where it's less than that, but you just wait for the tide to come in order for it to be higher. There's a big difference between the French canal system and the ICW in that you don't have to take your mast down in the ICW. All the bridges are 65 feet high, or they open for you. You arrive in your boat, and as you're approaching the bridge, you call them up on VHF, and they open up. There is one bridge in Miami which is only 55 feet high, but in fact you can just pop outside and go around the outside and come in again if that's too low for you. It's just over 1,000 miles long, maybe 1,200 miles, and it runs theoretically from New York down to Key West. The Key West element of it is a little bit of a cheat, because actually it's just a passage, buoyed, but it is just a passage inside the coral reef from Key West up to the bottom of Biscayne Bay. I have to say that my passage northwards and a little bit southwards down the ICW was one of the high points of my boating life. I absolutely loved it. It was a great experience, and for once it had no frightening events at all. Anchoring in the marshes of Georgia overnight is magical, absolutely magical. There are manatees swimming around your boats. The marshlands stretch out for miles and miles and miles, and as night goes down you think you're the only person in this little pond anchored, and you look around and there in the distance there's the masthead anchor lights of other sailing boats that are also in their own little ponds. It's lovely, and it's well marked, it's not frightening, and frankly I don't remember there being any mosquitoes. Passing through Miami is also an amazing experience. I mean, you go through the back gardens of all these millionaire homes. I mean, there are these vast, wealthy mansions with lawns and enclosed swimming pools down to the canal side, and there you are passing by the houses of Cher and Trump and whatever, and the Bee Gees. It is an amazing experience. I mean, it's an amazing experience just to see what wealth really, really is, although I've never seen anybody out there actually enjoying it. They all seem to stay inside the air-conditioned houses, but there you go. As you leave Florida State with all its domestic development, and the Americans have built properties on every single canal they possibly can, and where there wasn't a canal they've built one so they can build properties around it, a bit like we do marinas in the UK. You come on the border of Florida and Georgia, there's this enormous power station with smoke and acrid smells billowing out into the clear blue sky. Quite surprising really when you've been through such a beautiful domestic territory. There are two towns on the way up through the Carolinas. One's called, they're both spelled Beaufort, but one is called Beaufort and one is called Beaufort. They're both on estuaries and they're both absolutely magical places to visit. The one in North Carolina, when you arrive there, is a major boating centre, and it doesn't have a supermarket or anything like that actually in town. So the local boating museum has half a dozen old cars and vans in their car park, and they just give you the keys to one for you to be able to go to the local supermarket and do shopping for your boat. All they ask is that you put some fuel in it when you get back. Norfolk, Virginia is the American equivalent of Portsmouth. It is amazing. I mean, not only is it a place where the Americans have laid up all their old boats from World War One. There are some amazing old battleships and warships there, but it also has the modern fleet there. You go past parked aircraft carriers, and I went past more than one, which are so big. One of them had a 747 parked on its deck, and the 747 just looked like a tiny little toy aircraft. It was so dwarfed by the size of the carrier. There were nuclear submarine pens that I went past, and on one occasion I saw a boomer actually making its way in towards the pens, which are quite well disguised, but nonetheless not secret. I guess it's difficult to make a submarine pen for a nuclear warship, a nuclear submarine, secret. St. Augustine is the place where the Spanish used to depart from to go back to Europe with their treasure ships, having plundered the Caribbean. They made a settlement there, and the Spanish skippers of the treasure ships used to come north, get into St. Augustine, revictual, refuel, and then set off across the Atlantic. Our dear Sir Francis Drake went in there and had a battle with them and kicked them out and took over the place, and then couldn't find enough people to keep it going, so he left, and the Spanish came back, and then other British privateers came in and retook it, and it has changed hand. It changed hand constantly between the Spanish and the Brits. And then you arrive in Chesapeake Bay, and my main motivation for doing the ICW was to go to Chesapeake Bay. I'd just read about it and heard so much about it. I'd heard about Annapolis, I'd heard about Boston, I'd heard about the Potomac River, I'd heard about the islands in Chesapeake Bay, so I wanted to go there. On the north side of Chesapeake Bay is the Potomac River, and I went up the Potomac all the way to Washington, D.C., where I visited the museums, I visited the White House, I visited the Holocaust Museum, I visited the Lincoln Memorial, I visited the Vietnam Memorial. I mean, absolutely magical visit. You can anchor off there, or there's a marina. I got hit by lightning coming out of Washington D.C., and I wiped out every electrical item on the boat. And I must say, my insurance company, who at that stage was Pantaenius, were absolutely brilliant. They found me a boatyard in Cambridge, Maryland, and the boatyard, which specialised in electronics, installed totally new electronic gear throughout Bambola, and indeed Pantaenius paid for it all. They were Pantaenius did what they said on the tin. Eisenhower ordered the completion of the ICW in 1940, was then used for shipping goods southwards, so Trinidad, so the convoys could be assembled safely to set off across the Atlantic with help for Europe, with help for the war effort, and for us. Interestingly, the convoys assembled in Trinidad in a place called Chaguaramas Bay, and as anybody who sails in the Caribbean will know, Chaguaramas Bay is where all the boatyards are in Trinidad. There's half a dozen or more boatyards there and marinas, and that's where you go to avoid the hurricane season and to lay your boat up for the hurricane season. So it's still in use, and it's said that if you feel your anchor in Chaguaramas Bay, it's because you've hooked onto an old American tank or jeep or whatever. There's a great war museum there that's well worth a visit, which has the full U-boat history of U-boats attacking shipping around Chaguaramas Bay. And the U-boats got to that side of the pond by stopping off in the Canary Islands. And if you've ever wondered why islands like Fuerteventura in the Canaries are almost exclusively German, I mean, everybody speaks German. They're all German restaurants. They're totally German. The story is, and I think there's some truth in it, that during the war, the American U-boats, and indeed their mother submarines, there was mother submarines which carried fuel and supplies and stocks for the warring, for the fighting U-boats which were on the other side already, used to stop off in Fuerteventura and some of the other Canary Islands, because the Canary Islands was neutral. So after the war, the U-boat skippers and crews and officers remembered that the Canary Islands were such a nice place to be that they returned there and bought up holiday homes and visited them as holiday islands. So that's the story. I mean, not a lot of people know that, but, well, you do now. I joined the Intracoastal Waterway, the ICW, in Key West, having got there via the Dominican Republic and Cuba, and having enjoyed the lovely delights of Key West, I then headed up to Biscayne Bay on the ICW. But actually, all it is a route inside the coral reef until you get into Biscayne Bay. When I was coming back, I arrived back in Biscayne Bay, and I actually went back via the Bahamas, and that may be a better route for getting to the ICW if that's what you want to do. I mean, it's just a day sail across from Biscayne Bay into the Bahamas, and then the Bahamas, there's a whole chain of islands like the Turks and Caicos and so on, all the way back to the Spanish Virgin Islands, and then the British and American Virgin Islands, and so on, and the rest of the Caribbean. So the Bahamas is another route to go in order to get to the ICW. Biscayne Bay itself heads up by turn into Miami, which is where the huge cruise ship terminals are. You can have up to a dozen cruise ships parked in the vast terminal there. And to Miami, I mean, there's just waterways everywhere. There are boatyards everywhere. There are anchorages. Very nice way to see Miami by water. It then leads up to Fort Lauderdale, which is a major yachting resort. You probably have to go into a marina there, but it's remarkably inexpensive. Where it stops being canals, where it stops being sort of dugout canals, it becomes rivers and lakes, and these, as I said, are marked by buoys, pronounced buoys, and the Americans have green buoys to port and red buoys to starboard, but actually you've become quite used to it. In the southern part, the Americans use VHF Channel 9 for you to call the bridges, to get the bridges to open for you, and when you get further north, they use VHF Channel 13. They also use VHF to give weather forecasts. They have automated weather forecasts. And it's worth checking that your VHF, if it's European, will receive all these channels, because they're really, really useful. If they don't, I suggest that you just buy an American handheld VHF. Cape Canaveral, of course, is a great view. I remember being amazed, sort of looking out at the boat and looking at this rocket that was going to the moon while I was in my sailboat chuntering up a canal. That waterway then takes you on into Beaufort, South Carolina, and Charleston. Charleston was lovely to go through, quite complicated, lovely to go through. Charleston was where the first gunshot was fired in the American Civil War. A few hundred miles further north, you then get to Beaufort, North Carolina, which is where the museum is, where they will lend you a vehicle to go and do your shopping. I have very fond memories of going into Beaufort, North Carolina, because there I encountered Bill and Eileen, who were sailor friends of mine. The last time I'd seen them was in Trinidad. Really small boating world, isn't it? And then you go into this naval base called Norfolk, and then into the Chesapeake, and into the Chesapeake there's islands galore. There's also fishing floats galore. It's not a place where you can just sort of turn the autopilot on and forget about it. You've got to keep watch the whole time, because the Americans have these little fishing floats and they're absolutely everywhere. Into the north part of the ICW, into Annapolis, Baltimore, and then north of them there is a canal which takes you up to the Delaware River, and then there's a canal system which gets you up to New York and into the Hudson River. And of course the Hudson River through New York leads you eventually into the Great Lakes, but I guess that's another voyage. Without a doubt, you need charts to do this trip. You can't wing it. It isn't well enough marked. You need to know about the bridges. You need to know about the fuel stops and so on, and the depths and whatever, and the opening times of the bridges. So you need to buy chart books, and more importantly, you need to buy a copy of Anchorages in the Intracoastal Waterway. One of the best buys I've ever bought. I mean, this, I don't know if you can see, but it is annotated with my notes, and I use this every day. You can actually do virtually the entire trip, with possible exception of Fort Lauderdale and around Norfolk, Virginia, without ever going into a marina. You can anchor everywhere, and this book by a guy called Skipper Bob lists them all. It is an excellent, absolutely excellent essential for doing the trip. I hope this has whetted your appetite for the ICW, the Intracoastal Waterway. For me, it's one of the high points of my boaty life. I really enjoyed the passage north. I came back south by partly by the ICW and partly by sailing outside. I actually sailed around Cape Fear at night, and then went into some American port or other. It's a great different adventure, and frankly, it's not that much further than going to the Caribbean, is it? And well worth the effort. I loved it. I hope you enjoy it as well if you decide to do it, and if you decide to do it because of this video, I'd be absolutely thrilled. So, I wish you fair winds.